I met this guy in a parking lot once, and he told me, he's like, you know what? Awareness is a bitch. And I have always laughed about that statement because I'm like, it totally is. Like,
Yeah.
yes, it's the greatest liberator, but you're right. As you expand your awareness and are more embodied, you are going to feel a lot more.
Yeah.
And I think that that line between pain and love, starts to get really thin, and that,
Yes.
like, woo, this is really uncomfortable to be this open, this raw, this alive in a world that sometimes doesn't feel safe for that. But it's like that internal balance of like, I know that I can continually open only because I'm connected to my own fire, my own power, my own clean anger. That is the only reason I'm able to move through this to some extent with more vulnerability than leaving it.
Yeah.
Is because I know that I can protect myself.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I've been like, okay, I need to put some boundaries in place. Like, I know I can't control the narrative, but I can at least protect what people come to me with and what they say and what they share and what I'm open to even hearing. Because I don't want to be, the place where people throw their projections on what it is, what it wasn't. And it's like, wait a second, hold up. Like, no, you don't get access to this.
Right. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter. I am your host, Kylies Sky, international speaker, teacher, and a certified life coach currently working to become a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. Join me here every week as I offer thoughts and interviews on what it means to reclaim your humanness in this messy world. Hello, everybody. Kylies Sky here, your host of the Reclaim podcast. I am so honored to be here, and I'm really, really excited about the interview that you're going to be listening to with Kylie McBeath. A little bio: Kylie McBeath is the co-founder and chief visionary of digital wellness community Zura Health. She's a certified holistic health coach. She is a co-host of the Zura Health podcast. She's a speaker and a writer. She is a multi-passionate creative being whose mission on this planet is to empower women with the tools, support, wisdom, and resources they need to live happy, healthy, and fulfilling lives. Ultimately, her mission is to raise the consciousness of the entire planet through a higher health and emotional IQ. So I was honored to be featured on her podcast, Zura Health, which I will link in the show notes. And I was exposed to her work at that point, and Kylie is just amazing. Her words on Instagram are everything. I found a soul sister through her work. Her words really resonate with me. And so if you follow me on Instagram, I have a feeling that you will love following her, which you can do at Being is Beautiful. I highly recommend you check her out. But this conversation that we're about to have, we start by talking about turning 30. As many of you know, I turned 30 in June. And what many of you may not know is that about a week before my birthday, I got an infection that won't seem to go away. And it's an infection, inflammation. My body is just fighting something and it will not go away. And in this journey of turning 30 and stepping into what it means to be a woman on a deeper level, I've had to really deepen into my relationship with my body on a whole new level. And also my ability to advocate for myself and advocate for my needs and really be attuned to my needs. And these are the type of things that we don't often talk about in mainstream society, of like, how do we advocate for ourselves? How do we deepen into ourselves, as well as really understanding that we are interconnected, and that advocating for ourselves and being in our body also means knowing how to advocate for others and being in this world. I wish I had the top 5 things I learned about this experience, because I'm still very much in the process. I'm still very much in the healing process. I do not have answers yet. But I will say this. More than ever, I have come to realize just how intricately connected our mental health and physical health are to one another. You can't have one without the other. And science is showing this more and more, that mental health diagnoses such as depression, anxiety, there is connection between those things and our gut health. how many vitamins that we have in our body, how well our body is processing nutrients is connected to how well we feel mentally. And I would say the same is vice versa. If our body isn't feeling well, it takes a toll on our mental health. So, so often we advocate for our physical health. We advocate for it by going to the gym, by being conscientious of what we allow ourselves to do or don't do, rest, food, etc., etc. And we often forget that one of the most important things that we can do for our physical body is take care of our mental health. Taking care of our mental health, taking care of our emotional health, taking care of our spiritual health. They are intricately connected. And so if you're experiencing a lot of physical symptoms, please take good care of yourself. Please go get that checked out. Please do what you can. And also be open to the possibility that there is probably something happening in your mind that is contributing to the symptoms. It's not a correlation. It's not either like what am I trying to say? It's not a direct causation, right? I'm not saying that you sprained your toe and it definitely has something to do with your mental health. I'm just saying that they are connected and we can't look at these systems as separate. That is what I have been learning over the past few months. Hopefully that supports you, resonates you in whatever way is meaningful to you. Now, let me bring Kylie on. And as you're listening to this interview, I would love for you to be thinking about your relationship with anger. And what does that relationship look like? What do you want your relationship with anger to be? How do you feel like anger has supported you and has not supported you? And what shifts and changes to your relationship with anger needs to be in place in order for you to really activate the power of anger? Hello, my love. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. I am so excited that you're here.
Truly honored, Thais, and to be here with you and to get to share some stories, potentially some wisdom for your community that, you've created. So thank you.
Oh, I adore your presence on Instagram. I've been on your podcast, or Health, and it was just such a beautiful conversation. And I hadn't heard of you before that point. And then I looked you up and I was like, oh my God, I'm obsessed. This woman is brilliant and amazing. And I can't believe I didn't know who you were before that time. And I've just been so in love with your work and your words and just the way you show up online. So it's such an honor that now we get to flip the script and I get to interview you.
Thank you for those words. I feel the exact same way about you, which is why I was like, I need you on the podcast immediately.
We are so cute. So tell me, what's been going on in your life lately?
2019 has been a real shit show for me. I turned 30 this year, and right. I saw that and I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder if she's navigating, all of this stuff as well. And listen, I don't, not to get into the stars, but a lot of people are like Saturn return. And I'm like, okay, whatever, just trying to navigate my best. But I just feel like I've been going through this major initiation into womanhood.
Yeah.
And what that has really entailed for me is a deep exploration of my relationship with my mother, but also the mother wound, the feminine wound, and how these systems that we've lived in for thousands of years have shown up, have been internalized by myself, and have kept me small and really stuck in codependent patterns in my relationships, as well as whether that's business, friendship, or in my romantic relationships. And then recently my ex-partner Mark and I have been going through an uncoupling process, which has been a gift and also has been equally is painful, and I think that's something that I really want to normalize in this process, is there can be love and it can still be the right thing, to really just trust that and to really invite that deeper knowing that you do know what's best, although it might not look like what you want it to look like. So surrender, truly, like when it all comes down to it, this year has just been about surrender.
Mm-hmm. I feel like the week that I turned 30, like everything changed.
Mm-hmm.
Which is so wild because usually on birthdays, I'm like, oh, I turned this. Do I feel any different? I don't feel much different. But this year, turning 30, it really brought physically, I'm talking about like my body changed. Like I have been navigating an infection that I got the week of my birthday that still hasn't gone away. And it's forced me to really look at my relationship with my body, my relationship with what it means to be a woman, what it means to be mindful and present and surrendered and in tune with life. It's been really, really something wild. So I don't know if it's on return. I don't know if it's the 30s. I don't know I don't know what's in the stars right now, but it's been quite a few months. And I would love to hear just a little bit more about this idea of conscious uncoupling, because this is something that I have really explored too much on my podcast. And some people may be curious, like, what does that mean? What does that look like? I mean, I would love to hear your version of that.
Yeah. What is her name? Gosh, do I have her book next to me? She wrote a book titled Conscious Uncoupling, and then Gwyneth Paltrow and her ex-husband made this kind of like a thing with Dr. Habib Sadeghi. And when I first read about it, I was like, wow, that's really beautiful, because I did not experience that in my divorce. It was like the furthest thing from conscious uncoupling. It was like, you know, two tornadoes trying to navigate all of the emotions that had been repressed since birth and probably beyond. So conscious uncoupling is being able to hold the human while I believe also holding and respecting the sacred of each human, of like, this is the path and this is what's right for us. What that looks like in each relationship is different, but I think it's rooted in just an understanding and a deep level of respect for each other. So for Mark and I don't know if he's talked about this yet, but we created a closing ritual and ceremony that we did a couple weeks ago in order to really acknowledge and honor our relationship for what it was, which included some gratitude, like the qualities we're grateful for each other for, as well as our favorite memories, and then vision, like what do we see for ourselves individually, and where do we see our future as platonic friends, or whatever that might look like. And so it really, although, you know, not necessarily the path for everyone going through a breakup, as, you know, I've experienced the non-conscious way of breaking up and then a conscious way. But there was something so beautiful about being able to end the relationship within the essence of unconditional love, because it's almost like I left with less bags than I walked in with. You know, it was like, oh, wait a second, I don't have to carry all of this forward. Like, I can grieve this in this container and really honor and respect our relationship for what it was, and leave it with love instead of leaving it with, you know, a bad taste in my mouth. Now, with that being said, of course, there's going to be anger, and of course, there's going to be all the human emotions that you experience. It's what you do with it that really matters through this process, and that's why I think it makes it conscious, is because you're choosing to respond with love and respect, and not react out of emotional wounds.
Yeah, which is so hard. And I know that so many of people who listen to my podcast, you know, are really into like the spiritual community and the spiritual world, and like, oh my God, like I want to conscious uncouple because it sounds so fancy, you know, it sounds super so, like, enlightened. And I wonder, you know, having gone through it, and also knowing the conversation, because I know that you're, you know, have been in that conversation as well.
Yeah.
Like, have you noticed a tendency to use this concept as a way to spiritual bypass the actual heartbreak of the ending of the relationship?
It's a great question. It's actually something I was thinking about throughout the last couple of weeks, and something I've been very mindful of in the conversation with Mark, because we're both, it's very easy for us to love and to hold respect, but there's a point where it's like, could this potentially be spiritual bypassing? Now, why I don't say it has been for me is because I have allowed myself to feel like immensely, probably deeper than I've ever felt. After my divorce, I spiritually bypassed the whole thing because it was way too painful. But this one, it was like, no, I am angry. I am upset. I am grieving. Like, I am broken. And that's one of the things that I think is what makes it conscious, is that there's no disconnect from the actual pain of a breakup. Like, truly, this sucks, you know? Like, of course it sucks. I'm not going to say this is love and light and this is all great. It's like, no, this is effing the worst experience I've ever had to go through. And it's the most painful because I'm more conscious that I'm going through it.
Yes.
But yes, I can easily see how conscious uncoupling can be a tool to spiritually bypass the depth and the amount of grief. However, I've chosen to not bypass my feelings this go around. And luckily, thanks to a lot of sisterhood and actually brotherhood, I have a really strong community that has allowed me to express and to be angry, to throw my temper tantrums, to grieve. And to, I don't know about you, but for me, this process has been so much more than just a breakup. It has been, and most of my breakups have been this, is like a major catalyst to go deeper, to go within, to shed the armor that's been blocking my heart for 30 years. And from a physical perspective, I have felt like my whole body is just like shards of something just like breaking open, and I can feel it in my heart. I can feel it in my like whole body. And it's like all this energy is just coursing through. So I know I got a little bit up off topic, but breakups are so much more than just that. They're invitations to come back home to our wholeness if we utilize them as that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you said something that's really, that I want to highlight, you know, that the more consciousness we bring to a situation, in many ways, the more pain we're also inviting in. You know, like the more awareness we have, we're actually opening up to experience more. And I think many people don't anticipate that. So have recently moved, and the week before, I've moved so many times in my life, and I hate every time I've moved. I hate moving. I've moved internationally before the age, like 3 times before the age of 7. So moving to me is always, it brings up a lot of permanent goodbyes that at the time weren't permanent. You know, so like when I moved to the United States from Brazil when I was 7, I moved away from my biological father. And so I didn't even really understand it until this past year that I never mourned the death of my father. And people are like, well, he didn't die. And I was like, exactly. And that's what makes the mourning so easily glossed over, because he's not there. But the relationship I had with him has died. It's totally changed. It's complete. It could never have been the same. Anyway, so moving brings a lot up for me. And I thought, oh, I'm moving again, but I've done so much work on myself that it's going to be easier to move. And what's actually happened is it brought up, I've become more sensitive to the insidious and the suppressed feelings. So I've actually felt more. And so maybe at some point in the future, moving will not bring up as much because I'm processing it every time now. But I think this is a step of the process that we don't really talk about, how often it feels harder to be aware.
Yeah. I met this guy in a parking lot once, and he told me, he's like, you know what? Awareness is a bitch. And I have always laughed about that statement because I'm like, it totally is. Like, yes, it's the greatest liberator, but you're right. As you expand your awareness and are more embodied, you are going to feel a lot more. And I think that that line between pain and love, starts to get really thin, and that like, woo, this is really uncomfortable to be this open, this raw, this alive in a world that sometimes doesn't feel safe for that. But it's like that internal balance of like, I know that I can continually open only because I'm connected to my own fire, my own power, my own clean anger. That is the only reason I'm able to move through this to some extent with more vulnerability than leaving it. Is because I know that I can protect myself. being in the public, and having a public relationship, has its, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's one of those things where I've been like, okay, I need to put some boundaries in place. Like, I know I can't control the narrative, but I can at least protect what people come to me with and what they say and what they share and what I'm open to even hearing. Because I don't want to be, the place where people throw their projections on what it is, what it wasn't. And it's like, wait a second, hold up. Like, no, you don't get access to this.
Right.
So it's invited a different level of fierceness for sure.
Yeah.
Of being.
And you mentioned this idea of clean anger, and I've never heard of that concept before. I would love to hear a little bit more about what that means for you.
Yeah, this idea came from Dr. Robert Augustus Masters, who has been a pretty key player in my own life and evolution. And I went to a retreat of his a couple years ago, and he started talking about anger. And I was completely shut off from my anger. And it terrified me that he even brought it up. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not even, like, don't even talk to me about that word. Don't even make me act angry, because there was so much residual PTSD around anger for me that it just wasn't a safe place. Anyways, that's when the door opened. It was time to do some work around it. But clean anger essentially it's a heart open anger. It comes from our core, but the heart still remains open. So it's vulnerable. It's not shaming, blaming, and running over other people's personal boundaries. It's, hey, this is my boundary. Similar to your post today, it's a very much a self-protected and fierce energy that is like, hey, like, you crossed a boundary, you violated something, and this is my heart open, because I'm still open to feeling how it feels when my boundaries are crossed, whether that's angry, sad, fear, whatever. But then we have access to do something about it instead of responding in our survival patterns that don't actually protect us anymore.
Yeah, I've been talking about anger a lot in my one-on-one work. It's coming up a lot because, I don't know why. Well, I think it's because we all are angry.
Yeah.
I do know why. I think we are all just angry, but I also think that we are tapping into the collective rage that's happening right now over climate change and corrupt governments and systems that are oppressive. And, 2019 has been, for many, many people, an eye-opener into a lot of the dirty systems that have been in existence for a very long time. And so we're opening up more and more to anger. And a lot of the conversation is, first off, like, I don't think anger is helpful. I don't think that there's a purpose to anger. That's something that I used to believe, that, like, there's no point in being angry. Like, that's a message that we often got as well.
Absolutely.
Many of us as children, like, there's no point in being angry, particularly if our anger didn't actually do anything as children. Then we learned that there really is no point,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, in the spiritual community, it's like anger is a lower vibration energy. And it's just like, oh, every time I hear that, I'm just like, I can't with that, because it's just a deeper, more subtle layer of oppression of a very real adaptive energy that is here to actually support you in your individuation and in your personal sovereignty.
Yes.
And that's why I agree with you, that collective rage that's rising for all of us right now is necessary, so that we finally start to stand up and utilize our voices to align with what we truly believe in.
Yeah.
And that's vulnerable work.
Yes.
Really deeply vulnerable, especially, I've been researching a lot about developmental trauma and how we split from our anger when we experience either developmental trauma or shock trauma in early childhood. And that reconnection process is, it's a delicate one, and it does require extra support. And whether that's with your therapist, your body workers, like for me, somatic experiencing therapy has been instrumental in moving out of a freeze state and into more of an active, like, fight state. And I don't mean like actually fighting, but actually allowing that energy to move through my nervous system.
Yes.
Because it's like, for so long, it's been frozen.
Yes. And I think we need to slow this conversation down because I think there's so many good parts here, because many of us haven't been taught that anger is healthy and a normal part of the human experience. For many of us, we've suppressed our anger. And if we've experienced, like you said, developmental trauma, shock trauma, and we were put in such a state of helplessness that there was nothing we really could do, it does feel futile to have anger. Because anger brings up so much energy, right? And it's an activating emotion. And so if you have this activating emotion, but there's nowhere for it to go, it's debilitating. Yeah. And so it's better to not even have that activating emotion at all.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like, let's keep that suppressed. Let's disassociate. Let's rely on our coping strategies or survival strategies that we've depended on our whole lives.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, that's not going to move us in a direction that supports our well-being.
Right. Because anger, just like any other emotion, I know you talk about this a lot. I know I talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
All emotions are important, are normal, are valid, and anger is one of them. And so, okay, if we're coming from this place of like, okay, I hear what you two are saying. I get it. Like anger is important, but I don't know how to access my anger. What would you say?
I would say get curious about where you feel frustration or resentment in your life. Like utilize that first as an indicator of like every single time I'm frustrated or resentful, note it. Yeah. Like actually start to cultivate intimacy with those emotions, because just that invitation will begin to show you that anger is a very real emotion and it's there. Mm-hmm. Because we all get frustrated. I mean, unless we're really that dissociated and living in a bubble of denial. But I think that most people can, with compassion and curiosity, begin that process of self-exploration into their anger.
I agree.
And it's safe to do so, right? Like permission granted to be angry. And it's what we do with the anger that matters. It's not anger, it's not the problem. It's what people have done with it. Historically, that's the problem. Aggression is just the avoidance of anger.
Exactly.
You're not actually dealing with it.
Yes. Yes, I have, I have seen many people who have, let me back up. So I have heard stories of many people who share, my father was very angry. He was a very angry person, and he would abuse us, or, he would take out that anger. And I've learned that I never want to do that. Yeah. And so I don't ever want to be that way. And so I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be an angry person. And what's interesting about that is exactly what you said. I'm so glad that you said that, is that, aggression and the expression of anger where you're abusing, hitting, being violent, name calling, those are all ways that we actually avoid the feeling of anger. It's like the anger in our body is so uncomfortable, and we have so little regulations, ability to hold it, that the only option we have, or it feels like the only option we have, is to dump it out, is to put it onto other people, to hurt other people. Yeah. But that expression of anger is not actually what we mean when we say feel your anger.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's like, what is the anger here to teach me or to tell me or inform me about?
Yeah.
And that takes, self-awareness, that takes self-inquiry, that takes courage, because sometimes the messages behind anger, require us to shift how we show up in every area of our life.
Yeah.
Because it means you actually have to take a step forward and acknowledge and honor, your inner child.
Yeah.
Or the parts of you that weren't protected. And that also can bring up a lot of grief, truly. Yes. Because it's like, oh, wow, now I'm taking on this role of protective parent and having to grieve the realization that I didn't have this in early childhood.
Yes.
And it sucks.
Yeah.
And it's the only way forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I get a little frustrated when people say that underneath anger is sadness, because that's not it implies that the only usefulness of anger is to get to the sadness. And then that's a bypass, which is great for many of us who are so uncomfortable with our anger. We're like, great, we'll just go right into the sadness. I often prefer to see anger and grief and sadness as hand in hand. Sometimes one presents itself easier than the other, but usually they're together. And exploring both as two valid experiences of emotions informs us more than if we try to avoid one to go to the other.
Yeah. It's like that both and. Can I be both? And I actually think it's the opposite. I think sadness covers up a lot of our anger.
Yes.
Because it's safer for us to be sad, and I'm heteronormatively speaking for women, of like, historically, sadness has just been the way we lean when we're feeling emotional. And it's like, wait a second, could there be something underneath that?
Yeah.
Instead of the other way around.
Yes. 100%. And so, okay, so more about this clean anger.
Yeah.
So how do we know, how is this experience of coming into an understanding of your clean anger? What does that look like for you?
It's been more of a physiological experience, truly, of like actually feeling like I'm actually in my body. For most of my life, my pattern has been to disassociate and kind of leave my body and stay really stuck in my head. And so with this action, or with this experience of really opening that door to the clean anger and that fire that sits in my belly, it has provided me with just such a deep sense of safety, but also of like peace and inner calm that I have never experienced before. And I give most of the credit for this process, not only to my SE therapist, but also to Mark. Like, because of the level of safety in our relationship, it allowed me to reparent and co-regulate my nervous system in a way that I had never been able to do in the past. And only through the container of working on my clean anger, it was agreement we shared of like, every single time I'm angry, I'm going to voice it. Are you okay with that? Like, how does that feel? And I was able to do that over and over and be met with love, with understanding, and not, aggression. So I kind of reprogrammed my whole, not only my nervous system, but also my subconscious of like, oh, anger is actually safe. Anger, like this can actually be supportive. This is helpful. And one of the things I remember is like being invited into that space was like, I want to know when you're angry. I want to know what you're feeling, because and one of my mentors said to me, he's like, Mark doesn't want, a good girl. He wants a real woman, like somebody who's actually in alignment and authentic with their whole range of emotional experience. Now, mind you, that takes both partners to be on board with that type of work and conversation, but it's definitely something I highly recommend if you are in a partnership or even with your friends, is to build safety and agreements around the fact that you're working on reconnecting to your clean anger.
Yeah. I think that's really, really powerful. This idea that like we can invite our intimate partners, whether that's friendships or relationships, into our process. It doesn't have to be this individual self-development. Like, you just got to figure out by yourself in the isolation of your own home. Like, it can be like, how can I learn how to express myself and feel and be with a community of people around me, supporting me, giving me feedback, letting me know how I'm doing.
Thais, I could not have done that work without other. It's just, for me, it was not possible. And I think, and I know you talk about about this too, is like this idea of just extreme individualism in our culture, like this narrative that we're here to do it all alone. And I'm here to say the exact opposite, is like, we can't do it alone. Like, we need the presence of another sometimes to go deeper, to feel safe enough to open. Yeah. Like, only in that container, whether that's intimate relationships or with your friendships or with community therapists, whatever you have a secure and safe bond with, like, that's where the real work, deep integration work happens.
Yeah.
it's a both and though. Of course you have to do your own personal stuff as well. And, but it's a different kind of ball game when you're in a partnership where it's requiring that you be met and seen in those places.
Yeah. And something that I've been bringing in more and more in my work that I've been learning from grad school as a coach. I do this in my role as a therapist, but I'm bringing this more and more into my role as a coach in my What Do With Nice program and in my one-on-one work, is just like bringing the relationship into the process. Because oftentimes as a coach, when I've worked with other coaches as a coachee, it's about the problem, right? So we're kind of oriented in trying to work on and fixing the problem, whatever the problem is.
Yeah.
I have found though that all of our stuff gets moved into every relationship we have. And so why not use the therapy relationship, the coaching relationship, to open up the conversation about all the things that you're usually bringing into your relationships anyway, but you're not talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that such good stuff can get brought up in the container, like in the safety of this container between two people.
I completely agree. I think it's the most powerful space for transformation.
Yeah.
Is in connection with another.
Yeah.
Especially as that safety and security builds and that trust builds, it just keeps opening these doorways. And to utilize our relationships as containers for that type of growth is so beautiful. And you're right, it's rich. It's rich with treasure if we're willing. Usually it helps with both partners are willing to do the work, which hopefully they are. But it's. For me, I was single after my divorce, and I was like riding this wave. I was like, everything's so good. I've read all these books. That was just the beginning. I get into a relationship and I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, this is the real school.
Yeah.
This is where the work really is met and is integrated in a deeper way. So I love that you're bringing that in.
And tell me your experience of this, because last year I ended my 5-year relationship with an individual named Mark. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that. Interesting.
Yeah. And there was a point where I had to ask myself, is leaving the bypass work? At what point is leaving the higher, the step that is going to take me deeper into myself, and at what point is leaving bypassing work and I need to stay in it and work harder on this relationship?
Gosh. I think I could write a book about that topic.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm actually stopped for words right now, because you really described something that I haven't necessarily written about or spoken about yet, but because it's so fresh. But there is a line there. Whoa, let me tell you, am I being called to go deeper? And I think too, in our community sometimes, especially around conscious relationships, is some of these narratives around if you leave, then you're not doing the deeper work, or you're avoiding some deeper work, can be completely misleading, and also add more shame and guilt into a dynamic that is not necessarily for their better good.
Right.
Yes, I had to come to that, and it took time to really sit with that, because I've done so much. We did so much work in the container of our relationship, like the deepest work I've ever done. And, it does get to that point of okay, is leaving the actual growth here? Mm-hmm. And what I'll say about that for me is my body does not lie. Mm-hmm. 5 months leading up to our uncoupling, I was sicker than I've ever been sick. Could not get out of bed, losing the light of my eyes, kind of everything was shutting down. And I felt so much, kind of going back into codependency. I had so much shame, so much guilt of oh my gosh, I'm going to hurt somebody. I can't move forward. There's no way, this has to work. And I was just so attached to the idea of it needing to work, that I wasn't listening to the deeper truth, which was actually what your truth is right now is that you need to go.
Yeah.
That is your growth. And that is the liberation for both of you as you, move forward and expand your horizons and wherever that may go. But I think that can be a slippery slope for many, is like still utilizing all of these concepts, conscious relationships, and all the work we do as tools to stay in something that might not be in alignment.
Yeah.
And, you'll figure that out.
Yeah.
Eventually.
I mean, that's usually the answer, right? Is that like, right. You'll figure it out.
Right.
You're either going to leave or you're going to stay. You're going to either make the best of the stay or you're going to make the best of the leave. But like, there is no real wrong.
Right. Well, unless your body is shutting down and it's like, hey, P.S. like,
right.
As much as you want to, believe that you have full control over how reality operates, and for me, it was just a big, big struggle between divine will and personal will. And I was like, no way am I not going to be in control. So I learned the hard way again. I feel like that's one of my biggest lessons on this planet is like, Kai, you can't see what you can't see. So calm the F down, relax a little, release your grip and trust. And it's like, okay. And every time I've done that, everything's worked out beautifully, of course, but still it's like in that moment, I'm like, no, I don't.
We really think that we know.
Yeah.
We really think we know. Okay. So another like area that I want to explore with you is, you talked about how you're being really pulled to do a lot of mother wound work, which is very similar to my own personal journey. I've also been doing a lot of mother wound work. And I want to tie that specifically with anger, because what I've noticed for myself in my mother wound work is I still have a lot of anger towards my mother for not being who I needed her to be. And so now it's like, okay, I still have some of this anger. I'm processing this anger. I'm doing the work of being with this anger. And at the same time, like, God damn, I want her to change. Like, I want her to be different. And no matter how much I tell her that I don't like who she is, I would never say it in those words, but let's just say, like, no matter how many times I say, change, please, be different, be better, it's not going to change, right? She's not going to change. And so then it feels like this anger has almost nowhere to go. And so that's what I've been grappling with. And I'm curious your own experience with anger, mother wound, and like, what's been coming up for you.
Those two are so interlinked for me that they're the same conversation. So I'm happy you're bringing this forward. For me, growing up, there was a lot of aggression, of rage, of the pain of being a woman in a generation or world that did not lend you the opportunity to honor your voice and to really live in alignment with your own personal sovereignty. So, for me, I've had to be really delicate with this conversation, especially, on podcasts, because I have a responsibility to honor, the container that I chose to come in. But I think for me, because my mother did not know how to channel her anger or her rage in a way that supported her individuation, it blocked me from mine, clearly, because I disconnected from my own clean anger and was like, I don't want to be anything like that. And in this process recently of really exploring this mother wound and how almost my tie to my mother has kept me small, like really small, because I'm like, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to make mom mad. I don't want to make mom have to feel the grief of not living her life, to her fullest potential. And like all of this responsibility of my mom's emotional well-being on my shoulders, which is not my responsibility anymore. Like, I am not her parent. I am not her emotional caretaker. And she's actually going to be okay on her own. Like, it's no longer my responsibility. So that has been a big shift for me. Another mantra that I've been utilizing, because I've been doing a lot of reparenting work of like really cultivating my own inner mother, protective mother, and like acknowledging like there's nothing wrong with me. Like I'm worthy because I've had so much shame around this, that I'm the reason for my mom's pain. And that is essentially the mother wound keeping us small, is like we take on all this responsibility. So yeah, I've been moving through a lot of anger towards my mom's inability to change, to grow, and to be the mother I wanted her to be. With that being said, what I do with that anger is important. Luckily, I have a lot of surrogate mothers in my life, of older women who can hold this space in this mother energy, who I can heal a lot of my mother wound through that relationship, which has been really nourishing and nurturing, because it's healed a lot of my sister wounds too. It's not only my mother wound, but the wound with just the feminine in general, of like feeling safe with other women. But then also too, the next step of my journey with my mom specifically has been really individuating from her and setting boundaries, like in clear boundaries. And luckily they are met and acknowledged. Mind you, I don't think they're integrated fully, and like there's still a lack of trust in the ability to actually show up in the way that I would like. But there's also just this release of me not needing her to be anybody other than who she is.
Yeah.
Because I know that I can protect myself now. Like I'm not looking for anything in return. Now, of course, what I want and what I'm committed to creating, if there's willingness on the other side, is a deep, rich, and fulfilling relationship. But that doesn't mean I bypass all of the points in time that have deeply hurt me.
Yeah.
And I've had to acknowledge all of those, and I've had to grieve all of them. And, not to bypass, but, to also take into consideration. I asked my mom a lot of questions about her own childhood and her life, because I'm just like, what happened? Like not in like a judgment kind of way, but just like, tell me about your life story.
Yeah.
Because apparently, like, I need to know some things. And just going back into my own lineage and hearing the stories of the women, but also even on my dad's side, has been so illuminating for me.
Yeah.
Of being able to separate and see it from a wider lens, but again, with full permission to be fully human and to grieve the reality that maybe I did want somebody different, but that wasn't an option for me. So it's an ongoing process.
It is. And I think, what's so beautiful about anger is that it allows us to learn how to individuate, and so if there's like, for me, if you're listening and you're experiencing a lot of anger towards your mother for being not being able to be who you want her to be, the invitation there is not to lean into trying to change her, but to lean into that anger as a energy to individuate from her, and from that relationship, and define for yourself what it means to be your own inner mother. Just like what you said so beautifully.
That's everything.
Yeah,
it's truly everything, because that separation. Like if you don't utilize that anger to individuate, you're actually still stuck in the same loops. Like the dance is not changing.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's where that personal sovereignty comes in. And that's, of course, in that journey back to self and your own inner protective mother, there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable emotions that you have to experience.
Yeah.
That's why we need community. That's why we need sisterhood. That's why we need people like you who are talking about this on a very big scale, because I think this work is deeply imperative right now on our planet. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think like as we're leaning more and more into needing each other, and we're realizing that like our individualistic culture is not the answer. And if we are to really survive on this planet, we need to come together. It needs to be coming together from a sense of wholeness, from a sense of individuals. Like that's the power of collective community, is individuals who are fully whole in themselves coming together and leaning on each other, versus depending on the other person to be something that they're not, in order for us to have our needs met. And then, having that really damaging pattern play out again and again and again.
Yeah. You're right. Wholeness is it, and that's why that anger is so important. Like you said, it's what allows us to individuate and to actually figure out who we are, what we desire, and what our truth is, outside of needing somebody else to validate that through, enmeshment or codependent patterns, like you said, that aren't moving us forward.
Yeah. And what is it? I'm pulling it up right now that you wrote a few days ago that I really liked. Vibrational codependency. Is when your emotional well-being is dependent on the emotional well-beings of others. And like, I love that separation of that defining codependency to an even more specific point of emotional codependency, that vibrational codependency. What made you think about that, or what does that post mean for you?
Yeah, I was reading Matt Kahn's book, Whatever Arises, Love That. And he started talking about vibrational codependency, and I felt so seen and validated in his words that I was like, wait a second, this is very important for us to understand. I do identify myself as an empath and incredibly sensitive being. And I realized that when I was reading those words, how much I was deeply affected by my environment and by the emotions, or even just the vibrational well-being of the people around me. And I noticed that in my family system, that if one person felt a certain way, and usually, my parents held the control over like that barometer, if you will, that we would all match that. Mm-hmm. Or kind of like be in that same level of agreement where we don't really go above it and we don't really go below it, but we kind of just like stay in this place. Or as I talked about in that post, is we try to do everything in our power to make other people feel better so that we can give ourselves permission to feel that way, whether that's safe, whether that's love, whether that's acceptance. And so we're like, if only I deal with their emotions for them, or give them a reason to feel a different way, then I'll finally be free to feel what I want to feel.
Yeah.
And so it's like this external prospect for well-being, instead of it being an internal job, which is so understandable.
Yeah.
Especially because these are all rooted in early childhood. It's not something that is like, oh yeah, I chose to do this. It's like, no, you learned how to do that because that's what you were surrounded by. That's what was modeled.
Right.
So no shame, no guilt, none of that.
No shame. Yeah. Let's just, I love the light that you're putting on all these really important topics. And I really appreciate all the wisdom that you shared with us today in this conversation, and just being in this space with you has been such a gift. And do you have any final thoughts for anyone who's listening?
Final thoughts. All of you is worthy of being loved, including your angry parts. Mm-hmm. And the journey within is the one that matters.
Yeah.
That's all I've really got.
Yeah. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, love. So much love. And thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Reclaim the Podcast. This podcast represents the opinions of Thais Sky and her guests to the show. The content of this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only, and is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental disorder.